Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 203 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on how can parents deal with ADHD? And it is Friday the 5th of May 2023 as I record this, and it is my 22nd birthday tomorrow, so I'm really looking forward to that. So the reason why I've decided to do this particular podcast episode is actually twofold. So one, I know this podcast mainly has an audience of psychology students and psychology professionals. But sometimes, though, it's really helpful for us to understand how do parents and how do non-psychology people come at these mental health difficulties and what advice or unofficial tips that we can actually give them to manage this diagnosis. Because basically the entire premise that this episode is actually built on is, let's face it, ADHD, whatever diagnosis you give someone, is life-changing. You're changing someone's life forever because you're giving them a sign and you're giving them a label. And whilst diagnosis and labels, there's tons of research saying how unhelpful they are, it is still a starting point. And in the way how the world is currently set up, you need a label to be able to get funding, treatment, etc. So as devastating as these labels can be at times, they're also a really positive thing. And it's that positivity that I'm focusing on today, because ADHD is not negative. It just means that you need support and you need help in certain areas. And then another reason though why I'm actually doing today's episode is that we had one of our neighbours found like this week, and her child actually experienced a ADHD diagnosis. And then I realised, I don't know that much about ADHD. Maybe I should learn it. So I created this podcast episode, researched it, and I really hope that you find it useful. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, exercise can reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety, confirms review of those. When someone experiences depression or anxiety, there are a number of possible treatments, including therapy, medication, and lifestyle changes. Social prescribing, in which patients are encouraged to engage in sport, arts, and other activities, is also common and frequently cited as a way to manage or improve mental health. But just how effective is it in treating these conditions? A new meta-review takes a closer look. So, as always, I'm actually not going to click on to the article itself, especially because the evidence and the review actually speaks for itself, which are all in the title. So, it's really good that social prescribing, which I admit does sound weird, it just does there, because you would have thought that you would have to do mental health changes, you would have to do cognitive behavioural therapy, or just something to help these psychological factors that you actually improve and actually manage the oppression. So whilst I know social prescribing doesn't have long-term benefits, or at least as long-term as CBT from the stuff I've seen, it's still really useful though, but that we have got these tips and techniques which people can basically do for free, because it doesn't cost that much to do exercise. Of course, I'm not talking about doing them at a gym, because of course that is really expensive, but just engaging in art in some way and actually doing some exercise is really helpful. helpful though. So it's so good that we've actually started to look at the reviews them ourselves, because I won't lie, reviews can be really biased. For example, the literature reviews that I've done, I have no doubt there's probably some sort of bias that a really nitpicky person that could actually find though. But the more reviews that we look at and that we actually compare them against each other, the truer picture we actually find, which is always great to know. And the second one is how to be more creative according to psychology. And creativity is always really important to me as a writer. Creativity is surprisingly beneficial. Being more creative can have positive impacts on those with depression, dementia, and bipolar disorder, and more. And even outside of therapeutic settings, creativity has plenty of upsides. It has been associated with greater innovation, for instance, and may even increase mental clarity. From keeping dream diaries to using particular emotional regulation strategies. Here's the research on how to boost creativity. And because it's still quite a long article, even though it's digestive, if you do want to look at it, then I really do recommend you that you do. You can find it at the British Psychological Society Research Digest.org, I think. But there is a larger point that I want to make about creativity and mental health and all of the cognitive benefits, because I know that I've spoken about the cognitive benefits on previous podcast episodes, but creativity and actually making it something does have tons of cognitive benefits. Because you're being creative. I know that I've read somewhere, and I think I actually spoke about it on the podcast episode, that it leads to a brainwave that changes though, because you basically need to be in a new headspace, or whatever you call it, to be able to be really creative though. So it does have a lot of other benefits. So I know that for my own mental health, that is really good. So if I'm having a bad day, then it's really helpful to be creative and actually create something, because it does make me feel better. And to be honest, I do encourage that everyone becomes a creative. And the last one is, do children see beyond gender stereotypes during play? Some highly gendered toys help build certain skills. For example, positive for boys that build cognitive skills, or toys aimed at girls that encourage nurturing. Advertising often make it clear which toy is intended for which gender, but do children offer toys that stereotypically match their gender? A new study in Atka Psychologica suggests that kids' choices are more nuanced than we may think. And this is something I completely agree with though, because when I was at a child's party once, believe me, this was a good decade ago, because we don't even talk to the people now. Yeah, but I was really young. To be honest, I might have even been 8 or 9 like myself. And I know that I was listening to someone, and I think they were talking to me, yeah, and they were commenting on how their sons, their nephews, etc., they played with the girls' toys when they were young, and they enjoyed it. And later in life, they turned out to be perfectly straight. That was so, because I know that some people would be thinking that way, but. And then I also know that the sons of girls play with boys' toys. And the interesting thing, and the thing that I'm thinking about that, is that gender identity doesn't form, or doesn't even start to form properly before the age of 3. It doesn't become concrete, or children don't start to understand that gender is fixed until we're 8 years old, 11. Now, because I'm remembering this particular model that I talk about in my developmental psychology book. But equally, gender stereotypes and gender categories is one of the earliest type of stereotypes that children learn. So it's a very more detailed picture. However, when it comes to psychology and human behavior, as we know, we cannot just say that there's one rule for everyone and that's it, because everyone is nuanced, and it really does depend on lots of psychological factors and social factors. This is just another great example. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. So this week has been a really weird week, to be honest, because you know when you have weeks when you know you've done tons of stuff, but at the beginning of the week, because you were created a to-do list, and by the end of the week, that to-do list is still actually rather full. It sort of feels like you've done nothing. And I've been out tons, and I've been doing student and ambassador work and tons of other stuff. So I've been really busy, and I'm really pleased about that. That I'm actually getting stuff done, and I've been preparing for my first exam, which is next Wednesday. So it's a clinical psychology. I really hope that it's going to go well. And that I really am looking forward towards the end of next Friday, because me and my university friends are going to postmortem live. So we're going to learn about autopsies, how postmortems are done, and that is just going to be really fun, because it's also going to be because we're also going to be able to do dissection, including dissecting brains, eyeballs, and so many other great stuff. So I'm really, really excited about it. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave comments at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology. So this is a great sponsor for today's episode, because even though it's a mental health condition now that actually comes out of childhood, it can impact a lot of developmental processes. And even though this book doesn't touch ADHD, it does talk about a lot of typical development, like how children typically learn about playing and the social world, how their cognitive abilities develop, including how their brain develops over time. That's a really interesting one. And also talks about cross-cultural development. That is a topic I love, because it talks about cultural differences between different countries in terms of baby development. That's a perfect one. Well, that's definitely one that I really enjoy. And then it also covers tons of other great, really easy to understand topics that I'm really passionate about, including autism and tons of other really good topics. So if you want a developmental psychology book that will help you to deepen your understanding of this topic, but it is also engaging and conversational, then definitely check out that book. It's really good, and lots of people find it really useful. And also, we're connecting this back to the news of the podcast episode. It actually does talk about how a gender identity forms in children, because even though biological sex is a fixed, though that gender identity is a social construct. So it talks about how do children learn that, and the different research about that area. So, but that's developmental psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore, or local library if you request it. And you can also buy it directly from me at payhip.com/conwhiteley. So, whilst buying the books helps us to support the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And if you wanted to provide some monthly support for the podcast and to get tons of other great rewards, like early access to the blogs, a more personal relationship with me, and tons of other behind the scene extras, then you can also become a patron. Well, Patreon at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Link in the podcast description. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. We're going to be talking about how parents can deal with ADHD. And this is a really positive, really good podcast episode for psychology students and professionals, but also parents. So that's why I really do recommend that you listen to this. What is ADHD? In case anyone is unfamiliar with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it is a mental health condition that normally begins in childhood, and as I've spoken before on the podcast, there is evidence that it shouldn't be thought of as a mental disorder, with there being something wrong with a person. It is an evolutionary adaptation that the human species evolved to help our survival, and it is for that reason people with ADHD can live successful and fulfilling lives, similar to Bill Gates, Simon Biles, I'm not sure who he is, and Justin Timberlake, but to name a few successful people with ADHD. However, clinically speaking, ADHD is a condition with symptoms including finding it hard to pay attention, being hyperactive and impulsive, as well as people with ADHD might struggle to sit still, control their impulses, focus on tasks, and sometimes they are more accident prone than others. Yet again, I just want to stress that just because a person has ADHD doesn't mean they're messed up, have a problem, or anything else negative that society has attached to an ADHD label. How can ADHD affect a child's life? As psychology students and current or future therapists, we need to know how a particular condition will impact our client's life because we give them a diagnosis. When it comes to ADHD, then the condition does have a massive impact on every single aspect of a child's life. For example, a child with ADHD finds it difficult to focus in a class, keep up with their classmates, and to follow instructions, be it by a teacher or a family member. Therefore, sadly, children with ADHD do tend to have lower grades, and in the USA, they are more likely than students without ADHD to be held back a grade. When it comes to social and home functioning, then children with ADHD are disadvantaged as well, since ADHD tends to lead to behavioural and social difficulties because children with the condition might struggle to make friends and they are at a high risk of bullying. Personally, that isn't right at all, and no kid should ever be bullied, especially children with a mental health condition. But as everyone knows, children can be mean at times, and to be honest, so can adults. Yet, at least not everyone is bullied. Also, when it comes to home life, ADHD can cause problems as a parent struggle to manage their child's behaviour. They don't feel supported, and their siblings can even feel neglected and resentful. That's another reason why I wanted to do today's episode, because it isn't right that parents don't feel supported with the right information, tips and tricks. Therefore, whilst nothing on the podcast is ever any sort of official advice, I want to do something to help the amazing parents that have a great kid with ADHD, but they aren't necessarily sure how to deal with the diagnosis. Because, let's face it, even as psychology students and professionals, we would struggle and be surprised, or at least need an adjustment period, if our current or future child has a diagnosis, and we're the people that know this information like at the back of our hands, depending on our own interests and jobs, of course. Overall, we need to acknowledge that ADHD is challenging for everyone, including the child and parent and everyone else who comes into contact with the child. Yet this is far from a bad thing because There are ways to manage the condition, and with the right support, there is no reason why a child with ADHD cannot reach their full potential. How can parents deal with ADHD? As I'm sure everyone listening to the podcast knows full well, but parenting a child with any condition like ADHD or autism can be challenging, even more so when the parent doesn't have access to good information. Whilst this is not the ultimate parenting guide for parents with ADHD kids, I hope this helps some. Therefore, one of the first tips is definitely don't handle everything themselves, because that only leads to burnout, stress, and their mental health will decrease. That's why it's so important to get support and find other people who are going through the same thing as you. Secondly, parents can create routines as a body structure at home. The benefit of this is that it helps to keep a child with ADHD on track. Thirdly, parents can make sure that their doctors and teachers are involved in developing a plan to deal with the child's ADHD. Personally, I will admit I think that wording is very harsh, but it was sort of the best I can do, because the real point behind it is that to make sure that there is a plan in place to allow the child to thrive and manage the symptoms of ADHD so they can live a full and productive life, as I mentioned earlier. And the most important one, I think, is that parents have to be patient and they need to encourage positive behaviours. Thankfully, all of these tips aren't hard for us as psychologists to explain to parents, and these tips are really about hope, I think. Whenever a parent gets a diagnosis, then it can feel like the carpet has been taken out from under them, because in their eyes, at times, it can feel like their child's future has changed forever, and they have no idea what to do about it. I'm sure that some psychologists listening to the podcast can back me up here when I say that these feelings are just temporary, whilst the parent experiences a learning curve, what the diagnosis means, and what the next steps are. Finally, parents need to look after themselves. No one in psychology will ever say that having a child with mental health condition isn't stressful and challenging. That's why parents need to look after themselves, make sure they have a support system in place, and they're able to cope with everything that is going on. How can parents create a positive relationship with their child with ADHD? Time and time again, research shows that our relationships, our connections, and our social support systems are the most important factor in our mental health, our success, and many other areas of functioning. Therefore, I'm sure that a lot of parents will be asking us, as future or current psychologists, how do they build a positive parental relationship with their child with ADHD? Thankfully, it is far from impossible, and there are tips. Firstly, it is absolutely critical that a parent is a patient. And when a child is acting out, I say in air quotes because they're not really acting out, then this can be very hard to do. And I think it's perfectly reasonable that a parent does sometimes feel the need to shout. Ideally, there would be no shouting, and that is why being patient is so important. But I get it, this is difficult. I'm not deluded in that sense whatsoever. Especially since parents need to understand that their child is not acting out intentionally. Secondly, and I know that most parents don't do this, but it has to be said anyway, parents shouldn't compare their children to neurotypical children, as well as they shouldn't use negative words like stupid or lazy. That I honestly think is heartbreaking, but it could also reflect how stressful this is on them too. Yet using negative words will not help their parental relationship at all, and over time it will really damage the child's mental health. In addition, and this is my favourite one, parents, regardless if the child has ADHD or not, should spend quality time with their kids every day. Even if it is as simple as reading a book together, playing together, or walking around the block together, you are still spending time with your child and they will love that time with you. Finally, praise a child with ADHD when they show positive behaviour. As much as I have no interest whatsoever in behaviourism, when it comes to child psychology, there are very useful concepts to work with. Therefore, parents should encourage and praise their good behaviour, so this helps the child feel good about themselves, as well as it encourages them to continue their behaviour way into the future, so they can get rewarded again and again. Overall, we have one more section to look at, and I want to stress here that I hope you're starting to see that ADHD isn't a terrible, terrible condition that ruins lives. If you're a parent reading this, then I hope that this has helped you to realise that there are strategies and tips and ways to help yourself and your child manage this brand new diagnosis, as well as there are plenty more online for you to explore. If you're a psychology student or professional, then I hope that you're realising that there are a lot of management tips that we can and should give our parents when they first get the diagnosis, due to how overwhelming the entire situation can be. How to help a child with ADHD succeed at the school. Moving on to our final section of the podcast episode, I mentioned earlier that children with ADHD can struggle academically, and they're often behind compared to peers. However, there are thankfully some tips and strategies that can help a child with ADHD thrive at school. For example, a surprising tip is that helping a child at the school might start from home. Due to if a parent provides structure as well as a routine at home, then this is the benefit of helping the child to stay on track and avoid any distractions. As well as at home, a parent can help their child develop organisational skills, such as teach them how to use a calendar or a planner to help them keep a track of their assignments, homework and classes. Not exactly applicable to young children, but you get the point. Moreover, in terms of school itself, parents working with teachers and the school to develop an individualised education plan is important, and I will admit that I'm not exactly sure how this works in the schools. Yet I do remember a few people in my year at the school having something like this, so I imagine it's something as easy as talking to the school and getting the process started, since the plan focuses on the child's strengths and weaknesses of their learning, and includes accommodations for the ADHD, as well as if there is a change in the child's ADHD medication, then the school should be told about that. Conclusion. Overall, I want to finish this podcast episode by reminding us, psychology students and psychology professionals, that whenever we give a child or adult a diagnosis of ADHD or something else, we have just changed their lives forever. That isn't a bad thing. With a diagnosis, and as much as the diagnosis system is flawed, as we all know, and I've been researching this for my revision too, that amazing person can now get the support and treatment they need to go on and live a great life. And to parents of the children with ADHD and my fellow psychology students and professionals, I want to remind you that everyone has the love, support and drive to help a child with ADHD. Parents are brilliant, and if they work with doctors and their schools, keep having a positive relationship with their child, and if they have the right social support network around themselves, not only the child, then the child will thrive and they can do amazing things. However, having ADHD isn't a death sentence. A child with ADHD can do amazing things and live a happy, successful life, given the right support, treatment, and most importantly, love. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. Personally, I loved this. I think it was just so great to focus on the positivity for a change, because I know we've had some dark podcast episodes lately, but it's that positivity that I love, and it's why I do love focusing on mental health conditions, because typically, and because of how society views mental health, they're often so negative. But it's really helpful to actually look at this positively. So I'm really excited about doing future podcast episodes. I really hope that this was useful. If you know someone who enjoyed today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology, available in all the usual places, and you can buy it directly from me at payhip.com/Con And if you want to become a patron of the podcast, then definitely check out patreon.com/The Psychology Word Podcast. Link in the podcast description below. So have a great day, everyone. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.